Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. I am here with my buddy Teddy to talk to you about the 2025 ALA notable fiction titles for this, obviously for this year since they're 2025. But that's what I'm here to talk to you about. I will also talk about the book that has won the Carnegie Medal Prize. The ALA, or the American Library Association, usually meets at the end of January. And that is where they announce the winner of the Carnegie Medal and the notable lists as well. It is sort of an unofficial kicking off of Pulitzer prediction season for me, because sometime in March, I will be releasing my prediction for the Pulitzer Prize for this year, which will be books that had been published in 2024. So as we go through this list, I will talk about the book. There is a very short, like one sentence summary of each book. We'll read it. If I have read the book, I can tell you what I thought of it. I feel like I always have to say this in videos like this. I am not intending to review these books if I haven't read them. I'm just going to talk about my own interest in reading them or not. And I'll speculate a little bit about which ones might have a leg up in terms of possibly winning the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, which we announced, I can't remember if it's April or May this year, but it is in the future at some point. So there was a period where there really are no good indicators for what will win the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, but there was a trend for a brief moment in time where the winner came from the ALA notable list, and then it feels like we've moved away from that. But because it had been sort of like a mini trend, it's still fun to look at and speculate. Again, for me, I never stop trying to predict what might have a leg up in the competition as the year goes on and as the prize gets closer. But the ALA notable titles announcement does serve as a sort of nudge to me to really start thinking about the Pulitzer Prize. So let's talk about these books. I have also discovered some really great reads off of this, because there's usually a very good mix of books that you are familiar with and some that you might be less familiar with. This is where I discovered Gordo by Jamie Cortez. Just the one sentence that they offered for that book made it something that I really wanted to read, and I have a copy in my library now. So let's see if there are any of those. I have pulled some books from my library that I've looked enough to pick out the ones that I own a copy of. I have not read any of the descriptions of the books, so some of them are less familiar to me. Let's see if there's a big standout from the ones that I haven't read yet. I didn't think about this or plan appropriately. The pile of books that I have is way out of reach, so bear with me for a moment while I just grab them and slide them over here. And with that, let's get going through the ALA notable titles list. And let this also be a PSA, support your libraries, because they are a vital part of your community and they are measured based on how much people use them. So using your local library, not only does it save you money, it is just a good thing to do. I will also have affiliate links to all of these books in the description box down below. If you use that link, I get a small kickback, but also bookshop.org helps independent bookstores, or you could just go to your independent bookstore of your choice. So the first book on the ALA notable fiction titles for 2025 is Anita de Monte Laughs Last by Xochitl Gonzalez. This is a book that I have wanted to read. I had a bit of a question mark attached to it until I heard, I think it was an episode of NPR's Book of the Day podcast where they discussed this book and had Xochitl Gonzalez speaking about it. And I hadn't known until then that it was based on or inspired by the life of a female painter. So it is something I would like to catch up to. I have not gotten around to it yet, obviously. Here is their short description of it. A Cuban-American conceptual artist's untimely death in 1985 New York City becomes forgotten until a student uncovers her work while exploring women artists. Xochitl Gonzalez had written another book recently. That was her debut. I want to say it was called Olga Dies Dreaming, and that's another book I had really wanted to catch up to. It felt like And it feels the same for both books. This feels like it's on the periphery of Oscar conversation. Enough people have kind of liked it that it could sneak in, because it's very difficult to predict the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. As we saw last year, I don't think anyone had even approached predicting Night Watch by Jane Ann Phillips. So this is a book that could surprise, but it feels like a big long shot to me. Then we have Fire Exit by Morgan Talty. I am a big fan of Morgan Talty's work. I absolutely love Night of the Living Rez, which is a story collection. That was Morgan Talty's debut, and this is his debut novel. And it is beautiful. I'm a huge fan of both of his books. He actually reached out and contacted me after I loved Night of the Living Rez, and he turns out he's a nice guy too. So that's really good to know. And it felt like this was omitted from the conversation about, like, it was, I had kind of hoped that it would be nominated for the National Book Award. It wasn't. And I'm glad to see it popping up in a couple of places and getting some recognition, because I do think that there's a fascinating conversation that is had in this book about blood quantum, about family and community and all kinds of things like that. Let's see what they say. A poignant story about the secrets of a white man raised on a Penobscot reservation examines the bonds of family and the definition of heritage. Fascinating question. I do think, since this has been a little bit left out of the conversation when it comes to best books of the year, it's on the periphery as well. I do think there's a better chance than Anita de Monte Laugh's Last. And personally, I'd like to see it as a finalist. We'll talk about some other books that feel like heavier contenders for this year, but I would be happy to get this book into more hands. And especially if you have not read Night of the Living Rez, go ahead and do that. Do yourself a favor. Next, we have Ghost Roots by Pemi Oguda. Set in Nigeria, this eerie, unsettling story collection explores family, gender, and tradition. This was a finalist for the National Book Award for fiction. It lost to another book that's going to be coming up on this list. And I heard mixed things from the people who read it. It sounds like a bit of magical realism, if not magical realism, if that's the wrong term, because I haven't read it, so I can't really say. It deals with elements of the fantastic or ghostly or supernatural. But based on folklore. And that is interesting. But it feels like there's been a mixed reaction to the book. And I think the mixed reaction really depends on how a certain reader responds to a story that has those elements in it. I am interested in reading it, but I have not prioritized it, being honest. And actually, I forgot to look to see if Pemi Oguda is American. The fact that Pemi Oguda was a finalist for the National Book Award feels like a good indicator that they would also be eligible for the Pulitzer, because the Pulitzer is intended to go to an American author. Although this is the first year that they have expanded the definition. You no longer have to be a citizen. You could be someone who has been in the country for a long time. And I don't remember the specifics of how they expanded it, but it's opened up in a way that the National Book Award, I believe, already was open. So if Pemi Oguda was eligible for that, could be eligible for this. But I feel like that is something that's on the periphery, especially since it is a story collection, and it just feels like story collections do not make it very far with the Pulitzer Prize for fiction of late, and historically, but particularly of late. If they do, it's usually a linked story collection, and that does not appear to be what this is. So, by the way, if you have read Anita de Monte Laugh's Last or Ghost Roots, let me know what you thought of them in the comment section down below. Let me know if those are books that you think I should prioritize, especially since I'm hoping to catch up to a couple of books that feel like Pulitzer contenders before the prize is announced. And maybe I'm underestimating these books. So if you think so, let me know in the comments down below. This takes us to probably the heaviest hitter on this list, and coincidentally, the book that won the Andrew Carnegie Medal, James by Percival Everett. This is the book that won the National Book Award for fiction. It was also a finalist for the Booker Prize. And part of me feels like the fact that it ended up not winning the Booker Prize made it win the National Book Award, because sometimes it feels like, especially the National Book Award, wants to recognize something that is more of a discovery. So if it had won the Booker, I'm not entirely sure the jury for the National Book Award would have wanted to repeat a win, especially since they announced their prizes within a week of each other. So, and because it has won the National Book Award, ordinarily the National Book Award does not line up with the Pulitzer, but it does sometimes. And I feel like the times that it does are times when there was a runaway favorite for the year, like The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. I believe that was the last book to have won both prizes. And James feels like the type of book that could do that. However, there's that question of, is this so obvious as the front runner for the Pulitzer Prize this year that they might want to go in the opposite direction? And I'll talk more about that when I do my actual Pulitzer prediction. I feel like this book is undeniable. However, Pulitzer juries are going to Pulitzer jury, and Pulitzer boards are going to Pulitzer board. You never really know. And sometimes being a front runner feels like a mark against a book. So will they overlook this? I don't know. Anyway, quickly, we'll read you the blurb that they provided for the ALA Notable Fiction List. Told from Jim's perspective, this psychologically astute retelling of Twain's classic tale highlights the fight for dignity and justice with subversive humor. The citation from the Carnegie Medal: Percival Everett has written a modern masterpiece, a beautiful and important work that offers a fresh perspective from the eyes of a classic character. And the finalists that were beaten by this include Cinema Love by Jia-Ming Tang, which was a book that I DNF'd, but only because I wasn't in the mood to read it at the time, and it had ghost elements, and that's something that can make me nope out of a book pretty hard. I don't know, I might try that book again at some point. It also beat another book that is going to be coming up on the ALA Notable list. So we'll talk about that one later. But yeah, James, absolutely not surprised to see it on the list here, because it has been pretty consistently showing up in best of the year lists. And again, it feels like the overwhelming frontrunner for the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. Does that actually mean anything? I don't know. We're going to have to see. But it feels pretty undeniable, especially since Percival Everett has been a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. His profile and stature have only grown since that happened. He is someone who feels destined to win at some point, and James would be a really solid place to reward him. So those are my Pulitzer thoughts and the ALA organization's thoughts on James. Now we're going to talk about that third book that had been a finalist for the Carnegie Medal. Obviously, it lost to James. And I think because James ended up winning the National Book Award, I had been predicting that Martyr by Kaveh Akbar would win the National Book Award. It feels more like a book that the National Book Award would recognize. But again, maybe that also comes down to James just being a sort of undeniable book that was published last year. So this was also a finalist for the Carnegie Prize, but it is here on the ALA Notable Titles list. This is another heavy hitter. This is one I am absolutely going to need to catch up to before the announcement of the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, because it really feels like these are the heavy hitters and James is out in the lead, but Martyr could be close behind. It is a bit of a Marmite book. I always say a cilantro book, but some people say Marmite, which is just, some people love it, some people hate it. There's not a whole lot of in between. And I haven't seen that much of a cilantro reaction to James. I think at this point, some people are just a little tired of seeing James mentioned. So maybe they'd feel like Martyr is a breath of fresh air at this point. But yeah, no denying that this feels like a heavy contender for the Pulitzer. Not surprised to see it on the ALA notable list, even with that cilantro aspect. It does feel like this is one of the biggest books of 2024. Here is the description that they offer. An Iranian-American poet's obsession leads him on a journey to discover truths about his family's past in this darkly funny debut novel. Kaveh Akbar has released poetry collections before. This is his first novel, and really, again, has been one of the biggest books of 2024. The next book on the list is Sipsworth by Simon von Buoy. This is a book I've heard good things about. My husband Joel read it and thought it was really cute and adorable. And Chelsea, one of the co-owners of Montana Book Company, which is my favorite independent bookstore, read it and really loved it. I believe she said it was her favorite read from 2024, which says a lot. She is someone who really knows literature, and her recommendation has a lot of weight with me. So she's a big fan of Sipsworth. And Simon von Buoy, in terms of Pulitzer eligibility, I believe he was born in the UK, but lives in the United States now. So, parsing through citizenship and eligibility can be a little bit difficult, but it seems like he would qualify. So the description for this one is: an elderly woman preparing for her death finds an unexpected reason to live after she befriends a mouse. And it sounds like an adorable book. I would like to catch up to this at some point, and I just haven't. I do have access to the audio on Libro. I believe that's how Joel listened to it. So at some point, I would like to get to it. I don't think it's a long book either. I think it's kind of short. So that makes it even more doable. And at some point, I would like to read it. If you've read it, let me know what you thought in the comment section down below. The next one is The History of Sound by Ben Shattuck. This is an American book. This is something I have read. I listened to the audio. Wonderful audio production on this book. And this is a collection of linked stories. So again, story collections have had a really tough go with the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. But linked stories have had a bit more success, because the last story collection to have won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction was A Visit from the Goon Squad, which is a collection of linked stories. And then shortly before that, you had Olive Kitteridge by Elizabeth Strout, which is a collection of linked stories. You'd have to go all the way back to the year 2000 and Interpreter of Maladies by Jhumpa Lahiri to find a true story collection that won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. That's 25 years, for those of you keeping track. So History of Sound has that format of story collection that feels kind of appropriate to the Pulitzer board, so maybe it will win. It feels like North Woods by Daniel Mason was the front runner last year for the Pulitzer, and I wasn't in love with that book. Certainly not in the way that a lot of other people were. I see what people did like about it, but I felt very underwhelmed. And I got out of The History of Sound what other people say they got out of North Woods, which is a sense of time, place, and history, and particularly sort of American history. And I got all of that much better out of The History of Sound by Ben Shattuck. And again, the audio production is fantastic. There's a movie adaptation coming out of the first story in the collection, which is the title story. It will star Paul Mescal, who narrates one of the stories in there. It will also star Chris Cooper, I believe. And Chris Cooper is the one who narrates that story in the audio. Nick Offerman narrates two stories. It is a fantastic cast of people that they assemble to tell these stories. I think there was maybe one story that left me a little flat, but the rest of the book was very powerful. It was one of my honorable mentions for 2025, honorable mentions for 2024. And I will link that video down below if you'd like to see the other books that made it onto that list. Here's how they describe The History of Sound. Love, loss, home, and family permeate interconnected narratives spanning more than 3 centuries in New England. And just like Northwoods, it's kind of centered in New England. So even that is interesting. Next is Two-Step Devil by Jamie Quattro. The lives of 2 social outcasts, a man who has religious visions and a teenage girl who is being trafficked, intersect in this story of faith and redemption set in the Southern Appalachians. Jamie Quattro is American, and this does, from that description, this is one of the ones that I had been unfamiliar with. And I wouldn't say that description makes me immediately want to seek out a copy of the book and read it. So this is where I'm going to pass it over to you and say, if you have read Two-Step Devil, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Is it something that you think I would be interested in and should check out? Let me know. And because I hadn't heard of it, it's difficult right now to speculate for the Pulitzer. It has topics in it that would feel sort of urgent and timely for the Pulitzer to recognize, especially when you talk about traffic, faith, redemptions, the Appalachians. That's, they responded to Demon Copperhead, but that also might mean that it might be a while before they go in that direction again. It feels like it's safe to assume that Two-Step Devil is outside the Pulitzer conversation, but let me know if you think I'm wrong in the comments. Here's a book that I would place in the Pulitzer conversation, Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange. Tommy Orange's debut, a collection of linked stories, which was called There, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. And this is a companion to that. It is sort of a prequel, sort of a sequel. And it was longlisted for the Booker Prize. I have heard some cilantro responses to this. I think a lot of people in the UK in particular had not read There and went back and read it and then read this, or they just read it without the context of There. And it feels like, not that people in the UK can't understand, but it does feel like there was a lot of catching up to Tommy Orange. And I have not read it yet. I really want to. I did like There a great deal. I was so happy that it ended up being a Pulitzer Prize finalist, and it feels like, since he's been there before and he's sort of following up on the same themes, this could get him back into the conversation. Could he overtake James and Martyr? I don't know. It really depends on the jury, and we don't even know who the jury is until the prize is announced, which is just the way the Pulitzer Prize operates. We just don't know. They do it for privacy, secrecy, and they say for integrity. I have a whole video about if the Pulitzer Prize is in trouble and if they need to adapt to the modern world. I'll link that video down below because I talk about that specifically in that video. But yes, this definitely feels like something that is in the Pulitzer conversation. How far it will go compared to James, I don't know, but it does feel like it's in the conversation, or at least something that the Pulitzer jury will have to pay attention to as they deliberate and narrow in on a winner. Here's what they say. A searing epic that recounts the multi-generational trauma, institutional violence, and forced assimilation of Native people and the unhealed psychological scars that still linger. And that is also the central themes of There, and so I'm not surprised to see it here, but I believe it sharpens in on a lot of that, especially more pointed critique of Indian schools in Wandering Stars. There is much more a look at the modern state of people who are Native in the United States. And there is a quote from Kaveh Akbar on the back of the book. There is a quote from Morgan Talty on the back of the book. So look at that. We just have connections all over the place happening on this list. All right, we have two more. The penultimate book on the ALA Notable Fiction list for 2025 is Whale Fall by Elizabeth O'Connor. I have not read this book yet. I do have the audio saved, and I believe it's a very short audio. I feel like it's like 4.5 hours, something in that zip code. So I should try to catch up to it, and I just haven't gotten there yet. I forgot to look to see if I believe she's British. So therefore she would be outside of the Pulitzer conversation. But here's what they say about this book. Quiet, authentic, and resolute, this debut coming-of-age story chronicles the slow degradation of isolated 1930s Welsh island life and the community's exploitation by mainland ethnographers from the perspective of an unmarried 18-year-old woman. That sounds fascinating. Again, I have the audio saved somewhere. I just need to find the time to catch up to it because right now I just started a new audiobook. I already know what I want to do on audio when I finish that one. So it's just a matter of slotting it in and figuring out when it will be next. But I definitely intend to read Whale Fall by Elizabeth O'Connor. The final book on the ALA Notable Fiction Titles of 2025 is Wolf at the Table by Adam Rapp. This is another book that I had been very unfamiliar with and really am just going to be discovering for the first time in this description. I did Google Adam Rapp is American, and I don't really know anything about the book, so let's see what they say about it. Over several decades, siblings Myra, Ronan, Lexi, and Fiona experience life and the pursuit of the American dream with love, devastation, and violence. So I am going to have to look a little more closely at this book because, the mandate for the Pulitzer Prize is that it should go to an American author, preferably to a book dealing with American life. And that seems to maybe a little too specifically slot into that mandate. So I'll have to look a little more closely into that book to see if it might be an outside contender, because you always have to pay attention to those outside contenders. Did I mention that I don't think anybody had predicted Night Watch by Jane Ann Phillips last year, and she just came out of nowhere and it ended up winning the whole thing. So will the ALA Notable list line up with the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction this year? I don't know. It has in the past, but it hasn't recently. And there really aren't any good indicators. So it's as good as anything out there. At least it gives me a nudge to really start thinking and organizing my predictions and trying to figure out what might happen. And I also just like this list. I always find the ALA Notable list interesting. I will have a link to last year's reaction video in the description box down below. So tell me what you think of these books, what you would have liked to see on the list, and all of that in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.